This is Britt. I'm the chairman of the Forms Committee here at Baldwin Realtors, and I've been asked to create a little slideshow presentation to explain the latest rounds of changes we've made to the residential purchase agreement. Those of you who have been in business around here for a while know that we did one round of changes recently, the past year and a half or so. And after the form had been out in the hands of the realtors for a while, we got a lot of good feedback. And so we have incorporated a new round of tweaks, which are certainly not as significant as the first revision we did a while back, but we think this has improved the form, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback. So I'm going to just work through not every paragraph in the contract, just the paragraphs where a change was made. So first thing we did, this section here previously was at the end of the contract. So we haven't changed any of the content, but we put that right at the top of the purchase agreement on page 1. So it's a lot more visible, of course. And from a education standpoint, the realtors need to be aware that this acceptance date and initials that is highlighted in red here is the last party to sign the acceptance of the final offer needs to flip back to page 1 and fill in that acceptance date, and both parties will need to initial. That way, since we have so many timelines that are in play on this document, it is very clear, and so there's no misunderstanding about when those timelines begin, which is typically at the acceptance date. So that was we thought that was something to be more prominently displayed. So that's why it's now moved to the top. The introductory paragraph, this is the new paragraph. You'll see a change from what was under the old contract language. You'll see here we've got Central Standard Time shall apply, and it was suggested we change that to, under this new paragraph, Central Time, which sometimes it's daylight savings time. So we eliminated Standard Time, and so now we're just talking about Central Time. Nothing earth-shattering there. This red sentence here at the end is a new part that says the parties hereby agree that time is of the essence with respect to performance of each of the parties' obligations under this agreement. And that is just a legal phrase that makes sure everyone understands that non-compliance with a timeline under this contract amounts to a breach of the contract. So we added that section, that sentence rather. Terms of the purchase, this is the old contract. Nothing changed on the cash portion or the mortgage portion. This is the old language. It used to say, see attached vendor's lien addendum on the seller financing portion. So sometimes you don't have a vendor's lien securing a promissory note in a seller financing scenario. Sometimes you have a traditional mortgage. So I changed that from vendor's lien to seller financing addendum, just because it's a more broad description and it's not specific to a vendor's lien collateralization of that loan. Included with the property, this is the old contract. The red portion there is the part that outlines items that are sometimes negotiated as to whether they will or will not convey. We made an addition to that part to add TV wall mounting hardware of one of those items, because it was suggested that sometimes people are okay with the TV going, but they'd like to have the mounting hardware remain in place so the buyer can come in with their own TV and just hang it on the existing hardware. So we added that as a choice. All right, inspections and due diligence under the old contract was paragraph 10, as you see I've highlighted in red there, and the due diligence period was 7 business days if left blank as our default as far as how much time you had to conduct your due diligence inspections and so forth. We have revised that in 2 ways. We've moved that paragraph up to paragraph number 7, which was formerly where we had the termite paragraph, and now we've extended the due diligence period for 10 business days rather than the 7 business days you had under the old contract. And I'll explain why we did that when we get to the termite section, because they kind of correspond now. Insurance, property, and flood, paragraph 8 under the old contract. The buyer was given a default of 7 business days following the acceptance date to determine whether or not insurance was sufficient and affordable enough for them. That was 7 business days from the acceptance date to satisfy that contingency. Under the new contract, we have shortened that period to 5 business days as our default, primarily just because that doesn't require a physical visit to the property. It's just a matter of picking up the phone and calling insurance companies and shopping it around. So we decided that was one contingency we could strike off the list a little earlier in the process. Same with internet. Under the old contract, that was 7 business days to satisfy the internet contingency. And now, under the new contract, it's been shortened to a default of 5 business days. And for the same reason, that's a matter of shopping around to internet service providers and determining what internet speeds are available and various options associated with internet. Termites and wood-destroying insects. As I mentioned before, previously this was paragraph 7 under the old contract, and we've made honestly a pretty significant change in the way we're going to do business in Baldwin County with regard to how we're handling termite contracts. Previously, under the old contract, the seller was furnishing at seller's expense an Alabama wood infestation report within 7 business days prior to closing, which is obviously at the tail end of the transaction. And so we were running into situations where we had a lot of 11th hour headaches because we didn't start addressing the wood infestation report and handling issues that the report revealed until towards the tail end of the contract. We also had here in blue, I've made a notation just as an FYI, that repairs that are going to be done that were revealed by a structural inspection by a contractor, you would choose whether they were paid by the seller or the buyer, and there was no cap on the cost or a deadline for any of these things to be done under the old form. So we had situations where there was an astronomical amount of repairs that were contractually required by one side or the other, and that's obviously can be a very bad situation. So the changes that we've really made are significant. This talks about transference of the existing coverage. So under the new contract, it's now paragraph 10, and it's really going to be a buyer's obligation. We're no longer going to transfer bonds or termite contracts as a matter of typical practice. The buyer is going to obtain at buyer's election and expense the wood infestation report. We've made a carve out to that requirement in the case that the buyer is obtaining a loan type, which requires this to be a seller's expense, for example, a VA loan, and I think maybe sometimes FHA loans require this to be a seller's expense, but typically the buyer is going to get their own wood infestation report from the company of their choosing and at their expense. This next section, the black part of the second paragraph, is the same as the old paragraph, where retreatment obligations, and if active previous or infestation or damage is found, the buyer may order a structural inspection by a licensed contractor paid by the seller or the buyer, and you choose seller buyer, and we have seller as a default. None of that has changed. What's changed is the red section in the second paragraph, which reads, the party who is responsible for the cost of repairs and or treatment shall have the right to terminate this contract at their sole discretion if the cost or the extent of the repairs and or treatment is not acceptable. So that's very broad, I know, and some people raise the question about a party walking away from a contract due to an insignificant amount of repair just because they want to walk away from the contract. However, if we'll continue reading, if the results of either the wood infestation report or the structural inspection are not acceptable to the buyer, seller shall be notified in writing within blank business days, and that's 10 business days if left blank as a default, following acceptance date of this agreement, or this contingency shall be deemed removed. So when we previously had, all these things started to occur 7 days prior to closing, now we've front loaded all of these items to 10 business days from the acceptance date, which mirrors the same timetable we had on the due diligence section. So sure, a party could walk away from a contract based on an insignificant amount of repairs. I think that would probably be a fairly rare thing, but the buyer has very broad discretion to walk away from the contract within the same 10 business days anyway. So it, we didn't think it was a terribly significant issue, because we really couldn't decide on a fixed percentage or a fixed dollar figure that would be applicable across the board as far as a cap, meaning repairs up to, if there are repairs up to 2 or 3% of the purchase price, then the seller or buyer would be obligated to pay that amount in repairs. And we just didn't ever really get comfortable with an amount, so we just made it discretionary. And a party can, if the party's not okay with the amount of the repairs, that the party who is obligated to pay those items would have the opportunity to terminate the contract if they so desired. The next slide is another significant item that says it is the sole responsibility of the buyer to obtain a new termite or wood infestation contract for the retreatment and or repair of damage caused by wood destroying organisms from a pest control company of the buyer's choice, with coverages satisfactory to the buyer. This new termite or wood infestation contract shall be obtained at buyer's expense. Seller shall not transfer an existing termite or wood infestation contract to the buyer. And one of the reasons why we went that direction is that we had heard stories about coverages being changed between the seller and the buyer. So the buyer may not be getting the same coverage that the buyer had anyway. So what's the point of transferring an existing bond? Also, we've heard of situations where once a termite company, once there's a problem, the termite company discovers that they have to make repairs and spend money, they may start looking for loopholes or technicalities, technical defects that would allow them to claim that the bond wasn't properly transferred and deny coverage outright. So the way around that is just to let the buyer choose any company they want. We're not transferring bonds anymore, and it's just all on the buyer. And if there's a dispute or a problem post-closing, that is just going to be between the buyer and the termite company of their choosing. We're on paragraph 12. This is the section on home warranties, and we had fairly minor change to this paragraph. Here's your old contract language. The new contract language says we just added the words in the first sentence, if transferable. If property is covered by an existing home warranty, warranty to be transferred to buyer at closing if transferable. And we also added at the last sentence, buyer is solely responsible for selection of home warranty company and or review of warranty coverage, deductibles, exclusions, and limitations. Previously, I think they just said and we added and or because it's selection of the company, or if there's an existing warranty, it would be or review of that warranty coverage. So we said and or. Survey and elevation certificate under the old contract. This red sentence has not changed between the old and new contract, but I highlighted it because so I can make a point. Both the old and new contracts say this offer is or is not, and it's is not if left blank, contingent on survey or elevation certificate being satisfactory to the buyer. So the question was raised that these choices A and B, where it says seller will provide and buyer will accept an existing survey, or seller will provide and buyer will accept an existing elevation certificate, that might be confused for actually accepting the content or accepting what the survey or elevation certificate shows, which was not our intent. Just the intent was just to say that the buyer is okay with being provided with an existing survey for their review. So now to the new contract, that red section is the same about the contingency being satisfactory to the buyer. But the difference is on A and B now we just say seller will provide existing survey and seller will provide existing elevation certificate without the words and buyer will accept in there, just to avoid any potential confusion. Extension of the closing date under the old contract. There at the end it said a period of 5 business days from the closing date in paragraph 20 above shall be allowed if the closing is delayed by reason of insurance binding being withheld due to fire, flood, hurricane, named tropical storm, tornado, or other acts of God. And of course, this is paragraph 21, which is referring back to paragraph 20, which is the original closing date, which may have been extended pursuant to the other portions of this paragraph 21. So a reference back to paragraph 20 may not be the accurate closing date anymore. Therefore, under the new contract, we deleted the reference to paragraph 20. So now you've got, under these words in red, say a period of 5 business days from the closing date above shall be allowed if the closing is delayed by reason of insurance binding being withheld due to those various casualties. So it's just a general reference to the closing date, not the closing date referred to in paragraph 20. So now we've got this reference to the information for the listing and selling, brokerages, office address, license numbers, etc. Previously was at the very tail end of the contract, and it was, if you had an offer that was immediately accepted without a bunch of counters back and forth, you would have a bunch of blank pages between that acceptance and this information here. And so sometimes this was getting overlooked because people didn't keep flipping pages. So now that has been moved to just above the signature line so it doesn't get overlooked, but it's the same information. And then we get into our signature line section, which is the same. So those are all the new changes that we made. And so I hope you find them helpful. If you have any questions, you can feel free to give me a call. I'll be happy to discuss it with you.